I'm excited today to introduce our speaker who will be sharing some strategies with us. Scott Swedberg is CEO and founder of The Job Sauce, a career services company built to support people in creating professional opportunities and lives they love. A former LinkedIn employee, Scott and his team provide a variety of career services, from resume upgrades to salary negotiation coaching to helping individuals land their dream jobs. Since 2014, the Job Sauce has helped tens of thousands of people in their careers, earning awards and recognition from LinkedIn, Forbes, and numerous alumni associations. So Scott, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kelly. And I will also apologize if my 10-week-old kitten climbs up here and gets in the way of everything. Yeah, the joys of working from home. My feet are all scraped up from it, but yeah, what a joy. Well, thanks everyone for being here. Today we're going to talk about what to do if you've been laid off. So this is what we're going to cover. I want to talk about what to know about the job market, including a lot of reasons why it's not as bleak for some, or white collar workers who can work remotely. There's a lot of scary numbers out there, and I want to talk about what's actually so you can be clear on that. We're going to talk about what your dream job is and how to target what you're going to do next, resume and LinkedIn do's and don'ts, strategies that can 20x your odds of landing the job that you actually want, effective interviewing, cover some quick resources, and then we'll get right into Q&A. So everyone talks about how February's unemployment rate was so low and it was so easy to get a job. And that was misleading because this employment rate, what it means to be employed in terms of this rate, it just means that you have a job, whether it's part-time, temporary, or full-time, including gig jobs, like if you drive for Uber or Lyft part-time. The reporting mechanisms also skew what this number actually means. So if you look at this number, most people would think, 96.5% of adults have full-time jobs. Wow. And that's just not what it is. It's easier than ever to find a gig that excludes you from being counted as unemployed. And while the job market was certainly better in February than it is now, it wasn't that great. Another factor that people don't really consider for what it was pre-COVID-19 was that the underemployment rate is 33.8%. And underemployment means if you're doing a job that requires notably less training than you have, then that would be underemployment. If you have a finance degree, but you're working as an office manager, that would be considered underemployment. Or if you're, a finance degree and you're working as a barback. So it's important to consider that the job market before COVID-19, while it was better, it's not like it's so drastically different that it's impossible to tackle. The job market now, the numbers are pretty bleak. 30 million people have filed for unemployment over the last 6 weeks since people say COVID-19 really took hold and we saw that first round of layoffs. And there are more layoffs coming. There are plenty of companies that are just trying to hang on. They're waiting to see whether their payroll protection loan's going to come through, and it may or it may not. There are going to be more layoffs of white collar workers. Even more bleak, there are some economists that are projecting a 25% unemployment rate by the summertime. And that is comparable to the peak in 1933 during the Great Depression. To make it a little bit scarier, economists are saying that less than half of the U.S. jobs lost will be recovered by the start of 2022. Now, it is so early that these economists are working with limited data. So if you look historically at what projections have been, they're not always right. In fact, usually with this limited information, economists are not right. So let's talk about what it's going to look like moving forward. So there's more opportunity for white collar and workers with more well-rounded technical skills than people who are working in bars and restaurants. Most of the jobs that won't come back are going to be due to automation or some kind of investment in workforce reduction. And again, a lot of that is going to be blue collar. So that may apply to some of you, but I imagine many of the people that we're talking to today have at least an opportunity for more white collar jobs. I suspect that many of the new businesses and jobs that will be created are going to be focused on more tech savvy workers. Having more well-rounded technical skills is going to help, because you think about small businesses and what they look for and what they need. They don't have vast IT departments or vast departments of analysts. If you have 50 to 100 people working at a company, you might only have one or two people like that. So people who can handle things on their own, they're going to have a better outlook. Now, Indeed has reported that they've seen a 33.7% decrease in job postings compared to last year. It's important to note that that doesn't mean that the open jobs are down 33.7%. What gets posted on Indeed is not a direct translation into what's actually available, because 80% of jobs aren't posted online. And it's likely that many of the companies that would otherwise post their jobs online, even if the position wasn't open, because many companies have that in their HR policies, or they do it for pipeline building, that it's likely that many of these companies just aren't spending the extra money to post the job. So some companies aren't hiring like they used to, and there's no doubt about that, but some just aren't posting the jobs anymore. Companies are going to return to hiring. Many of them have started. There are just so many unknowns, and that's the most difficult thing about all of this. There's so many unknowns. We don't know what's necessarily going to come, and companies don't either. They're worried about hiring more people only to need to lay off people soon after. So they're being cautious. But ultimately, just because this job market is harder than it was in February, it does not mean it's impossible. The JobSauce works with thousands and thousands of clients a year, and we see clients land jobs every single week. We've seen them land every week during the pandemic. And it's self-defeating to assume that you can't be one of those outliers to overcome these kinds of obstacles, especially if you apply some of what I'm going to walk through today. So it's just important to know what you're up against and what you need to do to succeed. So let's get into that. First, it really makes a difference to take stock of what your dream job is, or just what you're targeting next. And it's highly personal. There's a think tank called 80,000 Hours. And what they did is they distilled the 60 top studies about job satisfaction, what makes a dream job, into a few main points. And one of the main takeaways is that it's not always about more money and less stress. And while a lot of people think that that's what they want, and it may be that that's the case, it's important to consider other factors, especially if you're going to be telling a company why you want to work there. So what I encourage you to consider is that work that's engaging is the top factor for what makes a dream job. And it's made up of four main components. It's the freedom to decide how to perform the work that you're assigned, clear tasks that have a start and an end. So it's not like it just drags on forever. You don't know whether you actually did it or not. A variety of tasks so you don't get too bored, and feedback. Empirically verified predictors. So I say that to point out that when a company asks why you want to work there, it's helpful to consider it from this perspective. If you know that the work is going to be engaging, that's something you should be excited about, because it means you're actually going to enjoy your job. So as long as a lot of the other factors are in place, that can be a pretty good sign, and it can convince a company that there's really good alignment between you and the job that you're considering. So some of the other factors they uncovered are, it's helpful if the job that you're doing helps others, that you're good at it, that you've got supportive colleagues. They don't need to be your best friends, but they certainly need to be supportive in some capacity. That it lacks some of those major negatives, like for some, an hour commute each way. That's a pretty major negative. And it really just needs to fit with the rest of your life. It needs to work with what you have going on and what your priorities are. So take stock of what your dream job is, because that's going to make it much easier for you to decide whether to pursue a role or not. And when you do interview, it's going to be much easier to communicate that you are a fit. So I want to get into some resume do's and don'ts. Now, I'll first say that for those who need it, at the end of this presentation, I'm going to provide a link where someone from the Job Sauce can provide a free resume review just because you're attending this webinar. So stick around for that. But as far as doing it yourself, some basics of what makes an effective resume and what distinguishes them from ineffective ones. If you've got less than 10 years of experience, stick to one page. And unless you are pursuing a role in research where it requires that you have significant publications, or it's a CV, you need every single thing that you put on there. Sometimes that's required when you're pursuing a government job. Ultimately, you don't want to go more than 2 pages. So if you're looking for a job at a private business, then max of 2 pages, and that's only if you've got more than 10 years of relevant experience. Because ultimately, recruiters average spending 5 to 7 seconds on an initial screen, which means that the formatting and the style needs to catch their eye. Not something that's overly crazy and flashy. It's something that can catch your eye in a bad way. We don't want it to be a car wreck, but we need to make sure that they see what we want them to see. Some basics of that is just making sure that the formatting, the style is consistent, and that each section is clearly outlined and distinguished. We don't want people looking at it being confused about what it is they're looking at or what skills you have that are relevant. Something that you'll commonly see is something referred to as an ATS. It stands for Applicant Tracking System. And the reason that it's important to optimize the content of your resume for it is that 75% of resumes are automatically rejected by an applicant tracking system or an initial keyword screen. If you're looking for a job at a Fortune 500 company, 98.2% of Fortune 500 companies use some form of an applicant tracking system. And lastly, probably the most important piece is when you look at the actual content, it's important that you don't use job description language. You don't want to just say that, let's just say you're in sales. You don't want to say that you sold products to certain businesses. We want to talk about your responsibilities in terms of accomplishments, what you did that's unique or expresses why you're good at your job. Just because you had a job selling stuff doesn't mean that you were good at it. But if you hit 150% of quota every year for the last 3 years, that's an important thing that distinguishes that you're good at this job. When it comes to the don'ts, there are a few things that get resumes tossed out pretty quickly. Errors or things that are undesirable, but not really fast enough to know whether you want to hire the person. So just limiting the don'ts often gives you the chance to have your resume viewed for a much longer period of time. You want to make sure there are no errors. That's almost an automatic toss out. There was a time where people thought it was a good idea to put pictures on their resume. Unless you're pursuing a role where how you look really does matter, if you're looking to be a model, and even then you probably don't need a resume, don't put your picture on there. And one thing that's often overlooked is email. We want to make sure that you use a professional email address. Nothing with crazy numbers or something that you created back when you got to create your very first email address. Ideally, it's something that's just a representation of your name, and preferably at a common email host. Gmail is the most common. I've seen some companies assume that because someone has an AOL email address or a Hotmail email address, that it means that they are not tech savvy. So if you've been wondering, should I just use a Gmail? I would say yes. So again, if you want someone to review your specific resume instead of getting this general advice, I'm going to include a link at the end where we can do a free review for you. So let's move into LinkedIn. So a lot of people think that LinkedIn should be just a copy and paste of your resume. And many times if you've done your resume correctly, there is a lot of overlap material, but LinkedIn should be framed a little bit differently. It should be a bit more authentic and informal than something you'd put in your resume. The kind of language used in a resume typically is going to sound overly professional, and there's an expectation that it is that way. But your LinkedIn is like it's like your digital handshake. It's your first impression of you as a person and as a professional. So we want to go about it a little bit differently because there's already a picture where it can show your smiling face and there's more context about who you are. It makes sense to be more informal. It's really your chance to tell your story as opposed to just put all your accomplishments as well. You can provide more context for maybe why you left a job or why this job from 20 years ago that you've included on your LinkedIn, how it shaped your career path or what it taught you about something that is going to be relevant to you today that you wouldn't really waste the space on a resume for. Having recommendations on your LinkedIn is a really powerful thing. Sometimes, even if we put on a resume, oh, references available on request. Now, most employers are going to check references when they get to the end of the process, but it doesn't make sense for you to put them on a resume. So from a first impression standpoint, you never really get that value. If you've got a lot of former employees or colleagues of any kind, whether it's an external partner or someone you work with who are saying good things about you and you've got a lot of them, that tells an employer pretty quickly, at least you care about these kinds of things. You've made the effort to improve your LinkedIn profile and they get to see what some people have said about you. They get more context that's more than just what you say you are. Lastly, engage with relevant content. There's so much valuable stuff on LinkedIn from experts in your field, and just the act of sharing those things with your network, commenting on posts, that kind of momentum does stir things up in your job search. It can add value. It isn't the strategy to go out and land a job, but it complements your LinkedIn presence and shows that you're constantly learning. Companies want to hire people that they feel are lifelong learners. And a few quick don'ts: don't just copy and paste content from your resume without editing. Again, you want to make sure it's more authentic, tells your story a bit more. And when you connect with people, it's really important that you customize that connection request unless it's an obvious one. Like when I first met Kelly and we talked about doing this webinar, I didn't need to customize my connection request to her, but I think she actually beat me to it and just said something quick and simple like, hey, it was great connecting with you. Really excited to start developing this webinar. And when people try to connect with me and I don't know them and they just send a request, I'm going to reject that no matter what. Even if maybe I do know them, but it doesn't just catch my eye. If you're trying to connect with pretty busy people who meet a lot of people, giving them a little context for why they should accept is a lot more likely to make it so they do accept. So remember that LinkedIn is your online professional presence. It's your digital handshake, your first impression. You can also use LinkedIn to learn from those who are in your target role. If you're trying to go land a certain position at a bigger company, there are likely other people who have that same role, other people who are managers of customer experience. You can go find those people pretty easily. You go to that company's page on LinkedIn and there's a little button that says see all employees. And then you can search through it based on job title. So you can see what is it that their current managers of customer experience have on their LinkedIn profiles. What's their work experience? What is their value? So maybe I should make sure that I have those things on my resume and my LinkedIn profile if I do have them. Remember, there are a lot of useful career insights and it's helpful to follow influencers in the industry because you'll learn a lot of useful and new things that might be a good conversation topic in interviews. And the most powerful thing about LinkedIn is that it is your searchable network. For those who used to have a Rolodex, this is what's replaced it, but it's exponentially more effective because you don't need to update it for other people. They do it themselves, and you can not only search through your connections, but you can search through their connections too. So you could be introduced to certain people, and I'm going to get into that. So one of the most impactful things you can do to land a dream job is to leverage your network, and doing so drastically increases your odds. So think about it this way. If you need to hire a babysitter, would you rather hire a stranger from the internet or hire someone that a close friend recommends? You're going to pick the referral. And companies operate very similarly. As a business owner, I can tell you that my business is extremely important to me. It's kind of my baby. And I'm not going to give responsibility to a stranger unless I don't have any other option. I want to work with someone that someone I trust says is reliable and is going to do a good job. When companies don't have another option, they hire through online applicants. But when they do have the option to either promote internally or bring in someone that one of their employees says is a good fit, they're going to do that as often as they can. In fact, ultimately, if you have two people, one applied online and the other one was referred, and they both got screening calls, we know that the person who applied online has about a 5% rate of getting hired as the person who was referred. In other words, the person who's referred has 20 times higher odds of landing their dream job. Not only does this make you more likely to land a job, but it makes your connection look good too. Ultimately, companies pay referral bonuses to their employees because they know that it works, and they know that the people who referred those people stay longer and the people who were referred stay longer. I'll get into a little bit more about why companies do this. But this data is from a 2014 year-long study by the Weaver Group. 1,000 companies, 4 million job seekers. And the key takeaway here is even if you land an interview from an online application, if you're up against anyone who entered the process another way, like a recruiter sent them through because they were found online or an employee referred them, it's going to be an uphill battle for you. All else equal, if you have 5 candidates and one of them got referred and the other 4 applied online, it's almost a guarantee that the referred candidate is going to be the one who gets the job. So when it comes to making this work for you, you want to start with the people in your network who know how qualified you are and why you're good at what you do. Start with past bosses, colleagues, friends, family, mentors. All of those are effective. And I'm going to get into how to identify those people, but I really want to hammer the point home that beyond the data we have about how good an idea it is for you to get referred, companies have a ton of data that suggests that this is the way to go. So for one, it's much cheaper. If you use a recruiter, oftentimes it's a retained search fee or contingent on if they place the person. Sometimes for a $1,000 a year hire, it can cost $20,000 to hire that person. Whereas the alternative is getting someone practically for free or paying a pretty small referral bonus. Even if you post it online, a 30-day job posting is often $500 or more. When I worked at LinkedIn 6-7 years ago, it was $500 for the LA area. I have to imagine it's probably up around $750, $800 now. Referred candidates are higher quality. Data suggests that high performers know high performers, and referred candidates average being 25% more profitable. They get hired faster, 40% less time, which also contributes to referrals being cheaper because you don't have to spend as much time vetting them because you already have all these references on the front end. They've got a higher retention rate. 45% of referrals stay for more than 2 years versus 20% of people who enter the process or get hired through a job board. All else equal, yeah, you want someone who's going to stick around longer because it's a pain in the butt to fill positions. It also gives them a broader reach because people who apply to jobs online are actively looking for jobs, but 70% of the global workforce is considered passive, that they're not actively looking, but the vast majority of them are open to new opportunities if someone comes their way. So, of course, companies want broader reach to find more high-performing individuals, and they have higher conversion. 40% of hires from one survey were referrals, but they were only 7% of the total candidates, which means a ratio from hired to candidate of 5.7. Agencies, like using a recruiter, is less than half that. Online applicants are less than a tenth of that. So it's a much more efficient process to hire through referral. So all that to say, companies are going to favor referrals. And the data suggests that'd be a pretty good business move for them and a good idea for you. So the more you can leverage your network to get referred, the more effective your job search is going to be. Okay, so how do you do it? It all starts with finding the right person. Ultimately, being referred just means that somebody passed your resume along to the right person. It's not some crazy formal process. Some companies have more elaborate processes than others, but I'm sure you know some people who work at a company, at least, where you might want to work, but your reach is limited. Very few people have 10 people or more who fit the criteria uh, for what you typically see in a referral. You know, somebody that you know reasonably well, that you have easy comfort reaching out to. But second degree connections, the people that your network knows, they're just as valuable. There's a widely cited Stanford study by a well-known sociologist that shows this, that these weak ties, people you don't really know that well, you might not even know them yet, they are just as effective at having you get referred than the people you know really, really well. So once you find the right person, you need to get connected to them, and typically you want to have a conversation. Ideally, when in doubt, ask for advice that the person is uniquely suited to give you, because people love to share their expertise. And when you ask good questions and then move that conversation into a question like, you know, does your company favor referrals? Are they hiring people right now? If you were in my shoes, how would you go about getting hired at Google, Amazon, University of Redlands, wherever? So you want to find the right person, get connected, whether you reach out directly or have a mutual connection introduce you, and then have the conversation where you show that you're a good fit or you're at least interested in that field by asking them questions that makes that person feel valuable and displays that you know what you're talking about. Ultimately, the key to do any of this is to get referred. Some people are comfortable asking more directly, hey, I know that a lot of companies are more likely to hire someone if they've been referred. Do you feel comfortable just passing my resume along to the right person? Would you be okay with that? Many times people will just say yes. So the part I want to go into now that I can actually show you is how to find that right person. So remember, this all starts by considering the people who you would consider your top connectors. These are the people who understand your value and they're a fan. You know, they want to help. Even if they're just a fan willing to help and they don't really know you too well professionally, it's worth looking through their connections to see if they can make an introduction. There's a filter, an advanced search filter that you don't need a premium subscription access on LinkedIn called Connections Of. And I've got it up on the screen. The Connections Of filter is your best friend. It is your best asset. So let's just say, as an example, that Kelly is one of my top connectors and I want to work in a university career center. Like, it's pretty likely that she knows some people who work in those places. So using this tool, I can see all of her connectors, of all of her connections, and use LinkedIn filters from there. So I can pick different companies, locations, even narrow down by job titles, then find the right person and reach out to Kelly and say, hey, I see you're connected to this person at this university. I really want to talk to them about X, Y, and Z. Do you know them well enough to make an introduction for me? And then maybe even provide a template for them to reach out and see if they're willing to talk to you. So using the Connections Of filter with the people who are more than willing to refer you to people, that's going to help you see their Rolodex. You're going to see their network they could introduce you to. I've got some people on. Got some people who are unmuted. Make sure you mute yourself here. Okay, good. I think I was able to mute everybody. So that's how you find people who can refer you. Ideally, they pass along your resume, you're in the door, and while it significantly increases your odds, it's not a guarantee either. You can't expect them to fight for you from here. It's up to you now, once they get you in the door, to effectively interview, and you need to live up to what a company is looking for in this new hire. Ultimately, effective interviewing comes down to being a yes for 3 questions. The first is, can you do the job? Most people, when they think about this, they're thinking about their expertise in that field or their IQ. How good are they at that job objectively? But what a lot of people overlook is the emotional intelligence aspect. their ability to regulate their emotions or deal with things, and things don't go according to plan. You may have heard the term behavioral interviews. This has become the primary interview methodology. It started a lot of bigger tech companies like Google, and now just about every company does it. It's where they ask you a question about a time that you encountered something specific, like, what did you do when you of a These days, working at any company involves working on a team and working with other people. So your ability to handle difficulties and regulate your emotions, not flip out and get upset about things, that's a highly sought after skill. Being able to handle people in a way that has them like working with you and have you get more done, that's going to come up in an interview, and it's part of that question of, can you do the job? Second, it's, do you want to do the job? This job. The two main ways that they gauge that is how much research you've done, usually seen by the quality of questions you ask. If you can ask a question that shows that you've already done some research and takes things to the next level, that's one way to show that you want this job, you're interested in that company, and just your overall enthusiasm. Some people, they're not great at communicating their enthusiasm. They communicate in a more deadpan way, and different roles have different expectations for how enthusiastic you are. But that enthusiasm is one way they gauge whether you're a fit at their company, because they want to know that you want to do this job. And third, will they enjoy working with you? Likability is a factor. I could do a whole hour on likability, but we don't have time for that. It's just important to know that it is a very real thing that companies consider whether they're going to enjoy working with you. Are you a fit on the team? Sometimes they put it as a culture fit. I can tell you that no company has a company culture that calls for people being curmudgeonly or not working well in groups or anything like that. It ultimately comes down to, are people going to be glad that they get teamed up with you? So I want to quickly cover some unique tools that are available for you, because the job search is a bit more strenuous and difficult than it has been in the past. It makes sense to go above and beyond given what is unique to you. So you should focus on tools, websites, platforms that are going to make a difference for you and what you're targeting. So a platform that I like and I recommend to some of our career coaching clients, especially if the skill that you're trying to communicate is your communication skills and your likability, how well you can present yourself, get a message across. There's a platform called crash.co, where essentially you film yourself doing a pitch, a video pitch about why you're a fit to work at that company or why you're excited about it. They give some good prompts on screen. They've helped a lot of people go that extra mile to communicate why they're a fit and actually get the interview or move on to the next stage. I've seen some people use it as a follow them saying the person in the interview. It's different. It goes a long way. And these days where you can't always find where to mail a thank you note, it can make a difference. If your emphasis is on your technical skills, hired.com is really good to uniquely match people to roles based on their technical skills, particularly if coding is your main skill. If you're a software developer or engineer, there's a company called triplebyte.com. And what that allows you to do is you take some coding tests, and that automatically matches you to companies who say they want to interview you. Let's say you're more of a visual person. If you're a graphic designer or something similar, it makes sense to show that off. It's going to be hard to communicate how good you are from a visual perspective just from a resume alone. If you're a graphic designer, obviously your resume is going to be part of your portfolio. But if you want people to see more, it needs to be easy for companies to access. You can use a website like Squarespace to pretty cheaply, we're talking $10 a month, show off the things that you've created. And lastly, it's important to remember that there's a job board for just about everything, especially now when a lot of people are unemployed. This is giving a rise to unique niche job boards that are worth exploring. If you just Google job board and the kind of role that you're considering and go a few pages deep on Google, you'll usually be able to find it. So I mentioned before that, especially on the resume side of things, it's kind of hard to give you general advice that's going to be helpful for everyone. So something that we're doing for viewers of this webinar is we're going to do a free resume review for you. If you go to resume.thejobsauce.com/redones, we'll give you a quantitative analysis of your resume, actual and actionable advice. So you can get on the phone with a resume expert and they can walk you through what they recommend changing. Of course, if you want to buy services from us, you certainly can. But our priority right now is equipping you all with as much as we can to be able to go out and do the job search on your own. And of course, if you need more help, you can get it. Something else that's available for you, not just from Red Ones and their career center, but also from the Job Sauce, is we'll do a career consultation with you, discuss what you're dealing with in the job search, how to overcome it. And again, if you're interested in exploring more services, we can certainly talk to you about them. But the intention here is to give you free stuff, and particularly on the networking side, to be able to find those people who might happily refer you. Using Alumni Fire, and this is the Red One's unique Alumni Fire platform. It's great for getting connected to alumni for these kinds of networking purposes. Oftentimes, the hardest part is getting to talk to the person to begin with. So once you can, it's just about navigating the conversation to get referred. So Alumni Fire is a great platform for that. So I've done enough talking, covering general advice. Here's some of those resources again. If you want to check out our blog, it's thejobsauce.com/blog. We've got a podcast as well. But now is the time where I want to kick it over to Kelly to pass along some of the questions that y'all asked to have, and if we might be able to explore a few that you can write in as well. So if you've got some questions that are coming up, feel free to put that in the chat as well. But to start, we're going to cover with questions that were submitted ahead of time.
Yes, awesome. Thank you, Scott. And one of the questions that came in actually quite a few times was a common theme. Is it wise to continue searching for jobs in fields that are not hot right now? I would assume things like entertainment, the restaurant industry, hospitality, things like that.
Yeah. So I want to be careful because some people might have the idea that their field is hot when in actuality it's about the same as everything else. I will say that if you look at the companies that are laying people off, those kinds of fields, particularly hospitality, in-person events, and restaurant industry, yeah, those are not going to be great industries to target. It's going to be important for you to look at what your transferable skills are, maybe find a way to bridge that gap. So for example, I spoke to someone yesterday who is a sales executive in the online gaming industry. And it's not so much that is not popular right now. It's more that he just wants to transition to more of the marketing and advertising side of things as part of his long-term career goals. And it's a little bit difficult to go straight from one to the other. But the bridge there is, which of those companies sell to the online gaming industry? You have something, this guy has something unique where he knows that industry inside and out. He's got all the connections. So if he's trying to sell some type of product or marketing solution to those companies, he's uniquely positioned to do that, even though he hasn't sold those things before. So it's not a great idea to keep looking for jobs in industries that are particularly worse off right now. It's ideal to look for how you can transition to a new industry that is somewhat nearby.
Great. And I know there's a resource that keeps coming up in the career services field from candor.com that has live updates of companies that are hiring, freezing, furloughing, laying off. And we can make sure to get that in the chat. Thomas or Lauren, can you throw that in the chat for me? So a few other folks had some questions around differences between layoffs and furloughs. Which one is better? Is there a better one?
Yeah. So I'm just going to cover the difference because which one is better is going to depend on your where you are. So So a furlough means a temporary laying off, that you are not getting paid to do that job right now, but there's an expectation that they will be bringing you back. Usually it's for a set period of time. It's like, okay, I've got a 4-week furlough. Like, we just got to get through this period, but everyone's going to have their jobs back if they want it. For a lot of people, that's preferable. What it doesn't allow you to do is to collect unemployment. And there are some variations state by state, and the whole unemployment situation is a little difficult to navigate right now. I read that as of April 11th, 71% of people have received the benefits that they applied for, but it depends on the state, and sometimes it's so great. So when you've been laid off, you can apply for unemployment and you can earn income while you look for a job. And some people, they'd say that that is better. I would say that's better than an indefinite furlough, especially if you think it's going to ultimately lead to a layoff. But in general, furlough means you're going to have a job. You don't need to look for a new one unless you want to, but you're not going to get unemployment. Being laid off, it's a bit more definitive. You've been laid off. Your job is not there anymore. You need to go look for a new job. On the bright side, it does give you a bit more clarity that, like, you need to go look. There's no question here. You are unemployed. Whereas furloughs can sometimes be a scary in between. So it depends on the individual, but those are the key differences.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, it's a lot of gray areas, a lot of complexities in all of this. And this actually ties in perfectly to another question I want to ask for a situation with one of our participants is currently furloughed and asks, is this a good time to look for another opportunity? I will be graduating in a year and looking to advance when and where the opportunity presents. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, great time to look. Obviously, it'd be better if you're getting paid while looking. But if you're furloughed and you don't have a job, nothing that's taking up the time, it makes sense to at least start exploring what's available to you, especially if you don't see yourself at that company long term. Go out and have some of these informational interviews, start these conversations with professionals who you can learn from long term and workplaces that you want to work. Focus on building the relationship first and foremost, and maybe it pans out right now. Maybe it pans out a little bit later, but yeah, pretty good time to look.
Great, and that kind of throws us into our next question is from a participant that's also been experiencing a furlough since March 19th and hasn't been actively looking for a new job yet because it's temporary, but kind of wants to do some soul searching and thinking about maybe where their career could go next. Are there any resources or tools that you'd recommend as they think about what other options they could consider?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that think tank 80,000 hours. That's a great place to start looking at. It provides a valuable perspective on how job satisfaction relates to your happiness and what those core factors are. This is a good time for that kind of self-reflection and exploration. It's particularly valuable to do so in a guided way where you can reliably know that it's going to be better for you in some capacity. So whether you use an online resource like that or work with a coach to talk about what you value and what you want to do next to get further clarity on it, strongly recommend those two kinds of resources, either something you find online like the 80,000 hours resource or working with someone whose job it is and has been to guide people on what's going to make them happy, just based on what they know is effective and what they're hearing you say.
Great resource. Yeah. And so you all can, if you haven't noticed yet in the chat, that link that Scott just mentioned is now available in the chat. I've also recommended to a few folks, if you haven't read the book, Designing Your Life by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans, or taken their course. They have an online course you can sign up to take. It does cost a small fee, but that course, I know for me, has helped think about career transitions and kind of what other things I might consider in the future. So that is something as well. If you're doing soul searching, I recommend that. And we can link to that in the chat as well. Okay, another question that's similar, but a little different. So what are some things that folks can do to keep busy during a furlough, especially when they're not sure about a job, and specifically maybe around building skills? I know you mentioned a few things, but are there other resources you'd recommend?
Yes. So something I mentioned before is uh, future proofing yourself from a skills standpoint. That in addition, and when we look into the future and what the future of work is going to look like, more and more of the basic technical skills like using Excel and entering number, processing that kind of information. Those are things where software already exists that can do that. Um, to take your technical skills one step beyond that to any kind of data analysis or anything that's going to be relevant in your field, that's what I would recommend that you work on. That something you could do and uncover pretty easily is if you look at what your career path is, a job that you're seeking next, and most in-demand skills, and plug that into a Google search, you can get a pretty good idea, if you don't have one already, of what the technical skills are that are most valuable for someone like you or the kinds of roles that you want to pursue next. Once you uncover what those skills are, there are so many free resources out there. I like LinkedIn Learning. I like staying within the LinkedIn platform, in part because there's some carryover where you can put it onto your LinkedIn profile as well. But there are dozens of more general free courses from some universities. I know Harvard, Stanford, MIT do a lot of free courses, more in the social sciences, but technical as well. There are all sorts of certifications, paid or free. If you just type in the skill and course, you're going to find it. But first step, identify what the in-demand skills are going to be for your career path. Find where you can get a certification or just learn the thing and start. Use this time to build the skills if you can manage it, because, if you've got many times 40 hours back into your week and not as much to do, or not as much flexibility to spend the time the way that any of us would really want to. So if you can muster it, focusing on those kinds of skills, that's going to be a valuable thing for you long term.
Great. Thank you, Scott. And I know I've seen a few organizations, I think, make things more accessible and free in the meantime. I know one of the things I was really excited about, Adobe had one of their, and I forget what it's called. But whatever they would have had normally in person, they did it virtually, and they made it free for folks to tap in and watch different presentations. That, as someone not marketing but interested in that, I was able to watch some things for free that were pretty exciting.
Yeah, there's more free stuff available now than ever before. Obviously, my company's putting out a ton of free stuff, and I'm continually surprised by how many companies are just like, something that would normally cost a few $100, they're just giving it out for free. Probably because people aren't buying it, but also, they want people using their stuff. So take advantage of it if there's a match.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to stick on this skills topic. And this is something I've seen a lot. Forbes has published some articles on this. Fast Company has. What skills do you see people needing right now in our new normal?
More than anything, communication skills. I can't tell you the number of friends and family I've spoken to who are working from home now, and they are pulling their hair out because of how communication structures are working. If let's say your boss wants you to do something, and they, normally they just come over to your desk, but now, you've got Slack set up as inter-office communication. So it's like, okay, I'm going to send a Slack, but then they're like, well, they haven't responded yet, so I'm going to send them an email. Maybe they're checking email, but then they haven't responded to that yet. So then they call, and it's like, well, if it was that urgent, maybe you should have just called to begin with. When there's a lack of communication structure, or the ability to clearly say what you need and make sure you don't need to have 6 follow-up calls because you forgot something, or the way you phrased in your email wasn't clear, making sure that you are comprehensive in your communication so there is no confusion about what you're asking for or what you need or what you're saying is an invaluable skill that a lot of companies now are realizing. Wow, some of our employees do not know how to clearly communicate, or even just to recognize that going across 3 different mediums and not having a set protocol for where to communicate what, that's a real downside. It's extremely frustrating for the employee and the boss. and it leads to a lot of inefficiencies. So those kinds of communication skills are extremely valuable in a work from home environment and will continue to be in the future. And when you look at what the future of work is likely to require, being able to communicate expertise is always one of the top items, no matter what survey you look at. A ton of consulting firms have done surveys like this. Those kinds of communication skills are always going to be valuable until robots can communicate with people just as well as people can, which not going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, I think I've also seen a lot of adaptability being a skill set that employers are wanting to see right now, which makes sense given the current situation we're in. I think adaptability is going to be a requirement for all of us. Even right now, being adaptable. My partner is also working from home today and clearly thinks we're done. So if you hear him, I'll mute myself quickly. Next question for you, and this one's a tough one. Is this a good time to switch careers? And if so, where do you anticipate a growth?
So I'll first hedge my answer by saying it depends. It depends on what you're in right now and what you want to switch to. It does. There are some things working in your favor for using this time to make this switch possible. Because it is a slightly harder job market, and some companies are not ready to start hiring yet, you might have some extra time to develop the skills that you want or need to make that switch successfully. So in many ways, it is a good time because you've bought yourself some extra time before some companies are hiring. And the more you can diversify your skill set and be appealing for the jobs that you're targeting, the better chances you have of landing it. That said, if a lot of people have been laid off in a certain industry that you want to transition into, unless you have a skill set that's going to make you more valuable than the people who lost those same jobs are now applying for new ones, you may be up against stiffer competition. So there's reason to consider that if you're up against people who have the experience a company is looking for and you're asking them to take a chance on you, it's going to be a little bit harder. So it depends. The fields that are growing the most right now are in the healthcare space and logistics. People staying at home and likely being more likely to work from home in the future means any company that's sending stuff across the world or the country or the state, and any companies that support that are on overload right now. I'm sure if you've ordered something from Amazon, you've seen, they said, oh, it's like longer than expected delivery times. Even if it still shows up super fast, there's a much higher chance they're not able to. So companies in the logistics space are a good bet. They're hiring quite a bit. Companies that are in the healthcare space, also pretty high demand, and that's continuing to increase in demand. If you look at a list of the fastest growing roles in the country, there's one that came out from that looked at 2016 to 2024. So we're halfway through. It was like 5 out of the top 8 were healthcare related, not just working as a nurse or a physical therapist, but some roles related to the administration of healthcare as well. So healthcare and logistics, probably the top 2, and the rest, it's not quite clear yet.
Yeah, and I think that the ambiguity around it, I think sometimes is so much of what's challenging around all of this and preparing. Okay, we have time probably for about 2 more. These are so many good questions that you all submitted. But if we don't get to yours, if you're a U of R alum, you can set up a time to chat with us one-on-one. We can chat about your questions. And if you are not a U of R alum, utilize the free resource that Scott shared. Absolutely take advantage of that career consultation, and you can continue to ask some of these questions. Okay, I'm trying to pick. What is the best way to connect with companies that have remote positions available?
So to find those companies to begin with, there are a few job boards that specialize in remote work. One of my favorites is called flexjobs.com. That one does require a paid subscription to access it as a job seeker, but many times it's worth it, in my opinion. They're also, you just Google remote job boards, you'll find a few. Remote.co is another good one that's fairly popular. Finding the companies on there and seeing that they are hiring remotely, uh, it's useful to know, because sometimes it's not always obvious from other job postings. It might not be clear that that's what they're going to be doing into the future. But if a company is specifically posting a remote job on a remote job board, then they are setting the expectation that's going to remain that way, at least primarily. So that's a great way to find them. Then as far as connecting to them goes, easiest thing to do is look them up on LinkedIn. Certainly you want to follow their company and do your research, but then you want to find someone to talk to there. Find a way to get referred. You go to the company page, you click see connections, and you'll see everyone who works there. You might have a first degree connection. You might have to look to the second degree. But ultimately, the way to go always, or 99% of the time, is to find someone you can talk to so you can get referred. I'd say the few exceptions are there are smaller companies, or it's always good to start with that. But if you see a company that you don't have a connection to, no easy way in, they didn't also go to U of R or wherever you went to college. If they are a smaller company or a startup and they post it within the last 72 hours, chances are if they're spending the money to post this job online, that's how they're hiring. So then it makes sense to apply. But use those job boards that specialize in remote work. That's the easiest place to find them, and then you can go through your process from there.
Great. And I want to ask one more question that I think is good to end on. And I've seen actually a lot of memes about this, that are making jokes on this. But when interviewing for future positions, what types of questions do you recommend asking employers on how they handled the COVID-19 pandemic regarding their employees? It's a great question.
So first, I'll say, wherever possible, you don't want to ask a question that you could have just found the answer on the internet. There are, between Candor, the resource that just got posted, and there are a few other new layoff-related companies that are popping up. It's pretty easy to figure out whether a company laid people off. So first, find out how they handled it to the best of your knowledge ahead of time, and then figure out what kind of questions are actually going to be relevant to you. Sorry, my cat here is freaking out. There you go. These cats are adorable, but they're absolute terrors. Sorry. So ideally what you're going to do is do the research ahead of time. And then one kind of question that I would want to ask is what did an employee, or excuse me, this cat, what did that employer do to support any of the people they did have to lay off? Beyond just giving them some severance or some extended health insurance? Did they provide any free resources to try to help them land on their feet? To find out whether they went above and beyond, or did they just do the bare minimum? And consider how valuable is that information for you? Because as a business owner, and I don't want to make excuses, but this is a hard time for everybody. And people are sometimes going to look back and go, man, I wish I handled that differently. You see a lot of that with a lot of companies who accepted some of those small business loans that aren't small businesses, going, we qualified for the money, we benefit from the money, but we recognize that other people need it more than us, and we don't want to go at it this way. So give companies the benefit of the doubt in some circumstances, but ask questions. Ask questions that get to the heart of what you really care about. And don't just assume that because a company had to lay people off that they're terrible in some way, because some companies are just doing what they can to get by, and they have other obligations. But when you ask those questions, come at it with a bit of perspective and understanding, and really seeking to learn, as opposed to like see if this is the make or break. Like, did you do what I think you should have done? Or, did you come up short and take the easy way out? It's going to be highly personal what you care about and what you want to hold the company to. But ultimately, it's highly personal. Just make sure you do your research ahead of time.
Great response. And I know we are at the hour. So with that, if you didn't see it in the chat, we will be sending out an email after this to everybody who registered with the recording, as well as the resources that were shared, so that you can follow back up. And thank you for joining. Wish you all well, and that everybody stays safe and healthy. Bye, y'all.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Scott.